Welcome to Race for Representation. I'm your host, Emily Tomimitsu, and I'm so thrilled to have you join me on this journey. I'm half Guatemalan and half Salvadorian, and growing up, I rarely saw anyone who looked like me on magazine covers. And when I started training for my first marathon and subscribed to running magazines, I couldn't help but notice the lack of Latina runners featured on the covers or in the articles. But when I run on the streets of Los Angeles with others, I see so much diversity. So why aren't we being represented more? This podcast is my way of centering Latina voices in the running world. Each episode will explore the stories of Latina runners, will challenge stereotypes, and advocate for greater representation in the running industry. Whether you're a seasoned runner or just starting out, I think there's something here for everyone. Let's lace up and dive in. In today's episode, we're going to be breaking down stereotypes and redefining what it means to be a runner. Because for too long, the image of a runner has looked one way, lean, white, and usually male. But that's not the full story, and we know that. Latinas and other runners of color have been here all along. We've been crushing barriers, we've been setting records and making waves in the sport. Yet, you don't see many of us on magazine covers, especially running magazine covers. Unfortunately, we're often erased from the narrative. But today, on this episode, we're going to change that. We'll explore the history of Latinas in the media. We're going to dig into representation theory and hear from Latina runners who are reclaiming space and showing the world what a real runner looks like. So why does it matter how runners are represented in the media? Let's start with a little bit of theory, specifically representation theory, which was developed by Stuart Hall. Hall explains that the media shapes how we see the world. So through images, symbols, and stories, the media tells us who we are, who other people are, and just as importantly, who belongs. Unfortunately, this often means leaving out certain people, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, including Latinas. When you think of a runner, what image pops into your head? If it's a thin, white man, you're not alone. Media outlets, especially running magazines, have long perpetuated a narrow view of what a runner looks like. But we all know that that's not reality. I asked Kimberly Knight Ortiz, a Latina runner, to do a little exercise with me. I had her picture a runner and describe what she saw. Here's what she said.
Usually they're like smaller, like leaner. And if they're white, they're like those like tall, kind of like the from Juno. What's his name?
Oh, Michael Cera?
Yeah, that's what I picture. With the tiny shorts.
When I asked Kimberly why she thought that was the person she envisioned, she said that part of the reason is because of what the media has shown us. I also asked Latina runners to submit their responses via a questionnaire form on my website because I wanted to gather different responses and thoughts. One runner shared the following. I often visualize someone very thin. While I wasn't fat, I never was lanky or lean, so it actually was several years before I called myself a runner. The reality is that the running community is a lot more diverse than what we often see in the media. Who we picture as a runner is also changing. One Latina runner in New York shared that her idea of a runner used to be very stereotypical, a thin white man or woman with a toned build. Now, she says, I think anyone can be a runner. Literally any person on the street could be a runner. Another Latina runner envisions her little sister. She said, I see a strong, determined, courageous woman, not afraid to just try. Personally, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done and that it's going to be increasingly important for the media to represent more diverse bodies. In fact, according to the Running Industry Diversity Coalition, RIDC, the U.S. Census predicts that by the year 2045, people of color will make up over half the population. And as more and more people from different backgrounds get into running, it's going to be more important for the industry to catch up and celebrate the full spectrum of runners. Stuart Hall also differentiates between types and stereotypes. Types are how we make sense of the world, like categorizing yourself as a runner or as a mother or caregiver. But stereotypes tend to reduce people to just a few traits. So think about it. How often do we see Latina runners in mainstream media? Personally, I don't think it's very often. The underrepresentation of BIPOC athletes is more than just a missed opportunity. I think it's actually pretty harmful. It sends a message that certain people don't belong in spaces like long-distance running. And research backs this up. I recently saw a paper that found that only 15% of athletes featured on mainstream running publications were BIPOC. And to be honest, I think that's a pretty small percentage when you consider the diversity of runners out there. I think that this underrepresentation isn't new. Latinas in particular have long been boxed into stereotypes in the media, whether we're depicted as the fiery Latina, or the overly sexualized vamp. Historically, Latina women in sports and media have often been shown as subordinate or marginalized. We're rarely portrayed as athletes, and this has contributed to a long history of us being erased or even sidelined from the sports narrative. But I want to change that. Latinas are reclaiming space in running and showing that we do belong. We belong on the trails, at the races, and especially on the front covers of magazines. One runner I spoke with shared a moment when she truly felt proud of her identity as a Latina runner.
My name is Paola Paredes, and I am a marathoner. I started off convinced that running was just not for me. It was a sweaty requirement that was part of middle school and high school PE class, and that was it. And I would do anything to avoid it, including signing up for tennis instead of PE, in signing up for swimming, just anything to avoid it. Then in my 30s, my younger sister started running, and I found myself, going to cheer her on. And every time, especially for the longer races like half marathons and then especially the LA marathon, I literally felt chills. I felt pride. I felt joy. And not just for my sister, but for all the people I was watching running by, and just really felt so emotional watching people of all ages, all sizes, all ethnicities, races pushing themselves to do something. And so it just was a consistent feeling that I had every time I would go and support her at a race. I felt like, maybe I should try running once more, like just one more time. And so that's how it kind of started. I kind of tentatively told my sister I want to start running, and slowly built up to my first race. And actually, my first race was during COVID. So we ended up doing a virtual half marathon. After that, I was just kind of hooked and decided to train for the LA marathon. Unfortunately, I hurt my knee or my ankle and ended up not being able to run. But then I made a commitment to run my marathon before I turned 40. And so I had one more year to do it. And this time trained with a running group. And I think that that really helped me stay on track and avoid serious injuries. And so in March of this year, I ran my very first LA marathon. And that's like a milestone in my running journey, I would say. And now I'm training again for the next marathon. So crossing the LA Marathon finish line was an emotional experience. I was also very, very tired. So it was that much better, I think, because I crossed it with two other individuals who had been training with me. One, my sister, and the other, our pace leader for the running group that we were a part of, both Latina women, and different stages of life from each other, from myself. Being able to cross it together was that additional layer to the experience that made me feel like it was so special.
Today's takeaway, I think, is that representation really matters. When we see ourselves reflected in the media, it's a signal that we belong. And for Latina runners, that signal has been missing for far too long. But every time you lace up and you hit the pavement, remember, you are what a runner looks like. We're here, we're visible, and we're unstoppable. So go out there, run proud, and show the world what a real runner looks like. Thank you for tuning in to Race for Representation. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired and motivated to push for a more inclusive running community. Together, we can help reshape how runners are represented and also ensure that every runner's story gets told. Don't forget to visit my website at raceforrepresentation.com. That's race, the number 4, representation. There you can explore the running magazine I created for my graduate thesis, featuring incredible stories from Latina runners. And if you'd like to share your own running journey, just click the Share Your Story button at the top of the page. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Keep running strong.